All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. We have a lot of information to cover, and we appreciate everyone being punctual and on time. As a reminder, you will be getting the recordings of this webinar and all accompanying documentation after this session. Next slide, please. Yeah, some AV technical issues. Bear with us just a minute. I'll go through some housekeeping with everyone while we get our slides back up. And I appreciate everyone joining us today for American Indigenous Tourism Association's webinar series. So today's webinar is in partnership with the Community Navigator program through the U.S. Forest Service. My name is Danielle Tehema, and I'm the Education and Business Development Director for American Indigenous Tourism Association. And I will be passing it over to our speaker in just a moment. There we go. Thanks, Tonia. Go back one slide. Thank you. All right. So for more than 25 years, the American Indigenous Tourism Association, formerly IANTA, has served as the only national organization dedicated to advancing cultural heritage tourism in Native nations and communities across the United States. We're established by tribes for tribes to address the inequities in the tourism system. The American Indigenous Tourism Association is a 501c3 national nonprofit governed by an all-Native board of directors and serves as a united voice for the $15.7 billion hospitality, the Native hospitality sector. Our mission is to define, introduce, grow, and sustain American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian tourism that honors traditions and values while helping businesses become market and export ready for domestic and international markets. Tribes who are looking to start to expand their cultural tourism footprint can find resources at americanindigenous.tourism.org, and visitors interested in learning more about Native culture can visit destinationnativeamerica.com. So before I turn it over to Tonia, our presenter today, Tonia Brown-Kinzel, GPC, she's a grant compliance manager at the grant plant in New Mexico. And again, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Tonia has worked or volunteered as a grant writer, grant reviewer, and grant maker since 1999. Her unique combination of experience yields special insights, helping Tonia earn nearly 20 million in grants throughout her career. She's the president of the Miami Valley Chamber of Grant Professional Association and a member of the National Grant Management Association. She's also served as on the GPA's Professional Education Committee since 2021 and is a GPA Approved Trainer. Tonia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And I apologize about those technical issues. I actually got kicked out of Zoom, so everything froze. So hopefully we are over those challenges. Really quickly at the beginning of this, I want to make sure that you all have my contact information, which I believe is also linked in the end of the presentation. But I want you all to feel free to reach out to me with any questions following up, because I am going to be throwing a lot of information at you today. I know you're going to probably feel overwhelmed with the sheer amount of information that you're going to get, but I want to let you know a couple of things. The first is you will be getting a copy not only of the recording, but also of all the slides that are in this presentation. Additionally, you will be getting a guidebook. It's like a 30 or 40-page guidebook, which gives you information and step-by-steps to really help walk you through all of this. Lastly, there are going to be some slides in here that I'm going to simply skip over, but they are in the presentation, as I mentioned, so that you can use this as a reference guide if you ever want to kind of go back and say, well, where did Tonia get that information from? Or why are the rules as such? And you'll see, because this focuses on federal grants, you will see the actual citations from the 2 CFR 200, or what's also known as the Uniform Grant Guidance. I am the grant compliance manager at the grant plant, so my main responsibility is in ensuring that our whole portfolio of clients are in compliance with all of their grants. That's also federal, but as well as non-federal private sector grants or state-based grants. Today's learning objectives are for you to gain knowledge about and skills in requesting common changes for federal awards, because it doesn't matter how much planning we go into this with and how much due diligence we do, and really we can dot every I and cross every T to ensure that we are ready for these grant programs. And invariably, things happen and change along the way. And so this session is really to help you understand how you can request those changes in the absence of any guidance from your program officers. Now, if the program officers give you specific guidance about how they want you to do it, obviously follow what they have said. But in the absence of, and that's often the case, if they don't really tell you how you should go about that change request, then this is a way for you to try and do it. You're also going to learn when you need to get permission for prior approval on a number of actions. And most of those actions are related to financial expenditures. And so it's really crucial that you get that prior approval, because if you don't, they can disallow your costs, and you don't want that to happen. Finally, you are going to build skills in just general effective grants management, and you're going to understand when you need to sort of reach out and the things you need to do. You'll sort of know when you need to ask questions. So really quickly on this page, you see a whole bullet list of the various things that require prior approval and or are frequent things that will happen in the course of a federal grant, where you might need to go back and either ask for a scope or budget modification, or perhaps a no-cost extension, or maybe your project director has left or is going on leave and you need to figure out what to do. So in the uniform guidance, which is a very robust 370 pages without any formatting, the words prior approval appear 28 times, prior written approval appears 15 times, approval just by itself appears 70 times. So some variant of the word or words prior approval, written approval, etc., it occurs in the grant guidance, the uniform grant guidance, 162 times. So while what we'll be discussing today is not entirely exhaustive, it is going to touch on the most common and most frequent requirements or changes that might be happening to your grant. Quick disclaimer, neither I nor anybody on the grant plant staff are attorneys or CPAs, so we are not offering legal or financial advice, but we are offering best practices in the field and the way that we understand the uniform guidance to read. Additionally, the information that I am providing to you is all based on the uniform guidance that went into effect October 1st, 2024. So it's been in effect for about a year. If you've gotten a grant in the last year, all of these things will apply to you. I do want you to note, however, if you are currently managing a grant that was issued before October 1st, 2024, you may also want to double check the rules of the uniform guidance that date back to 2020. That was the latest iteration before that. Lastly, as I mentioned, your mileage may vary. Your program officers may have specific ways they want you to do that. There, may be forms that they want you to fill out. Whatever they tell you to do, listen to them first. This is really was born out of me sort of fumbling my way through this over the years, going, I don't even know how I'm supposed to approach the subject, and who do I talk to, and what do I say? So this guidance is intended to help you in your path if you don't have that kind of guidance from your program officer. So let's really quickly kind of show you what the slides are going to look like, and then you'll understand why in some of the slides I'll be skipping over them, and occasionally I will read from them. But when you see a slide like this that has a gold box around it, and up here at the top, you'll see 2 CFR 200.407. That is direct citations from the uniform guidance. And so if we are thinking about or talking about prior written approval, I want you to note that in the uniform guidance, it says the absence of prior written approval on any element of cost will not in itself affect the reasonableness or allocability of that cost unless prior approval is specifically required. And so we will talk about those things in which it does say prior approval is required. So when you see these gold boxes, a lot of times I'm going to skip through. Again, they're for you to sort of reference later on if you want to see where I'm getting this information. And I want to note that anything that is underlined or in bold is from me, and that is my way of sort of drawing your attention to the very specific part and sometimes very lengthy and verbose verbiage. So let's talk a little bit about the potential remedies or what I would call consequences for noncompliance. So these are the things that the federal government can do if you do not follow the rules. And that includes temporarily withholding payments until you do follow the rules or correct something. They can disallow all of the costs that are related to that thing if you didn't do it correctly, if you didn't get prior approval, or if a change happened and you didn't get approval on that change. That is the most common thing that happens, and the very thing I want to make sure that everybody in this room avoids at all costs. They can also suspend or entirely terminate your award in part or its entirety. They can also initiate suspension or debarment proceedings, and that's usually in a pretty egregious circumstance in which there is intentional or willful disregard, noncompliance, or even fraud, waste, or abuse. And they can withhold further federal funds to your organization, as well as pursuing other legally available remedies. Now, those last three are pretty rare. I am fortunate to say I have never seen them in my career, not not with any of the organizations I've worked for and not with any of my clients, but they are possible consequences. The more likely consequences are the withholding of payments and them disallowing all or part of your costs associated with something if you did not follow the rules, get the changes done the way they're supposed to be done, and or did not get prior approval as required. So let's talk about the first scenario, right? Let's pretend like you've got to do something about either changing your project director and or any other key personnel. So what I'm going to do in each of these sections is I'm going to take you through a potential sort of case study or a scenario, and then we're going to show you an example of how you can go about it. Let's say that your project director, which is sometimes called your principal investigator, is leaving your organization, whether temporarily or permanently, but your organization wants to continue executing the grant in their absence. So prior written approval to change your PD or PI is always required if they're going to disengage from the project for 3 months or more. So if they go on a medical leave or a family leave for 3 months or more, you do have to notify the program officer and ask to put in another project director. Or if they are going to reduce their time and effort commitment to the project by 25% or more. Another possible scenario could be that maybe one of your key personnel in the project, the grant award, whether it's an employee or a contractor, is changing roles or leaving your organization permanently. You will need to get prior written approval when the key personnel was either specifically named by their name or their position in either your original or approved proposal. You can also, or you do also have to ask if the key personnel is listed in your grant agreement or scope of work. And you have to ask for prior approval if the key personnel had to be previously approved for any reason by the program officer. And sometimes that's because there's a specific condition, or maybe there's actually a statute requirement. So if any of those three things apply, then you would have to ask for permission for key personnel. Now, if they are key personnel, but they weren't previously named and the position wasn't really discussed in the original proposal, then you do not have to ask for permission. So now what I'm going to do, and you'll see this in each of the sections, is I'm going to give you sample language for how you could ask that in an email to your program officer. And I'm going to sort of work with a very theoretical case study. Let's say I have ABC nonprofit that has gotten a grant and they are offering grant management training, capacity building type services, one-on-one capacity building services, and they're doing an evaluation to see how that's working. Let's just say that is the sort of grant that we're working from. So I might say something like, on behalf of ABC nonprofit, and per 2 CFR 200.308F3, we would like to advise you that our project director, Jane Doe, is leaving their position at ABC Nonprofit, effective on October 24th, 2025. ABC Nonprofit has hired a new grant manager to serve as project director, Jorge Lujan, effective October 27th, 2025. Jorge comes with a wealth of experience. A short biography and his curriculum vitae are attached for your review and consideration. ABC Nonprofit would like to request prior approval to name Jorge Lujan as our project director for the grant program, and then you would insert the title. Let's say it's Building Federal Grant Management Capacity for New Mexico. And then I would insert the federal award identification number or whatever unique award ID you have. And then you want to say from the U.S. Agency of Awesome Office of Cool Grant Programs, their random federal program. With a program performance period of October 1st, 2024 to September 30th, 2027. We seek your approval for this change effective immediately. Now, that's what you'll see I have done in that sample language is I made sure to include all of the crucial information about the grant title, the award identification number. I made sure to let the program officer know which specific agency it was coming from, because sometimes they will be serving across multiple agencies. I gave the dates that everything that's involved. So you want to try to make your program officer's job and life as easy as possible. Especially right now, there is a lot of stuff going on at the federal level. Many program officers have left for various reasons, and so the program officers that are remaining are extremely taxed and burdened, and we need to have a lot of empathy for them and try to make this as easy as possible for them. Not only is that just the right thing to do, but it's also likely going to result in faster approvals for you, faster expediting of anything else that needs to be done related to your request, and more likely to be approved. Now, the last paragraph that I might include, this is not required, but I think what it does is it sort of telegraphs to the program officer, hey, this is not going to change a lot of other things. Don't worry. Don't panic. It might say things like the terms and the conditions of this federal award do not prohibit a request to the project director. This request does not require additional federal funds, nor does it involve any change in the approved objectives or scope of the project. And finally, no changes to the terms and conditions of the initial award are requested. So in almost every one of the instances, you're going to see this same sort of boilerplate text at the very end of all the sample language. So I'm not going to read it over and over again. I will tell you that this is not required, save for one example, and that's no cost extensions. And we will talk about that when we get there. So this is, the citations that you'll see. I'm not going to read these, but they are in your slide deck so that you can easily refer to, like, where is Tonia getting this information? Let's talk about scope modifications. Let's say the circumstances have changed for your project and there's an opportunity to add a related activity or a related objective. Now remember, that objective has to still align with the notice of funding opportunity and the statute governing the grant. If you want to do a scope modification, prior written approval is required when you want to change the scope of work, when you want to change or add a project or program objective, and or if you want to make program plan revisions, major ones. So if you're adjusting any major activities, if you're adjusting major project milestones or benchmarks, if you want to do something to your evaluation plan that is different than you had originally intended and proposed, you would need to go back to the program officer to get their permission. And my recommendation to you is, when in doubt, always defer to, I should ask for permission, or just reach out to them and say, hey, do I need to get your permission to do X, Y, and Z? And they'll be happy to tell you if the case is no. So here's more example language. You might say something like, on behalf of ABC Nonprofit and per 2 CFR sections 200.308B and 200.308F1, we would like to request a prior approval for a revision to the program plan for our grant, Building Federal Grant Management Capacity for New Mexico, insert the federal award identification number, from the U.S. Agency of Awesome Office of Cool Grant Programs Random Federal Program, with a program performance period of October 1st, 2024 to September 30th, 2027, effective immediately upon your approval. ABC Nonprofit would like to add one objective to our program, which was not included in our original approved proposal. The objective would be to, quote, leverage a return on investment, or ROI, of at least $8 to $1 offered as matching funds, end quote. This objective aligns with the goals in the statute that govern random federal program. We have a a local government agency that has recently pledged up to $2 million in matching funds with no additional investment needed from ABC nonprofit. We would like to incorporate this measurable objective into our program plan and objectives so that evaluation activities can also be used to assess the strategy's effectiveness, along with our other program activities in achieving the program goals. Existing resources already committed from this grant would support data collection and evaluation on the ROI. Now, really quickly, I will tell you, as I would tell many of my clients, most of the time you do not want to add objectives. That's just adding more work for you, and you're usually not getting more money to do that. In this case, it would make sense to actually add this objective because we want to be able to use the existing funds that are already being spent on the evaluation to evaluate this as sort of like the overall part of the strategy. Is this a best practice? Does it work? Did it, yield an ROI as expected? So because we want to be able to use some funds on this and it really perfectly complements it, this might be an example of why you might add an objective. You might also want to take away an objective or somehow change or reduce or lower the numbers that are included in an objective. Whatever it is, you want to convey that to the program officer. And then I would include that boilerplate text that we talked about at the in the last section, sort of terms and conditions don't prohibit it. This does not require additional funds. There's no changes to the terms and conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's say for scope modification purposes, you had originally proposed subawarding to organization A. And we all know that sometimes we will write a grant, and between the time that we write the grant and the time that we get the grant, a lot of stuff can change. And so let's say that their sort of organizational priorities have shifted, and they've decided by the time you're awarded the grant, they actually don't want to partner with you on it anymore. So now you have identified another prospective subrecipient, we'll call them Organization B, who you do believe can do the same work and who brings comparable capacity to the project. You will have to get prior approval to add a new subrecipient only when and if it's required in your terms and conditions of your grant award, and or if the inclusion of Organization A, the original one, was a determining factor in the merit review or eligibility process. Well, how do we know this? Usually, if you look at the outline for what needs to be included in the technical proposal, or if you look at the NOFO's evaluation criteria, it will tell you, like, describe the subrecipient's organizational capacity. Well, that's definitely you trying to persuade them that they would be a good partner. And so if it's either in your terms and conditions, or if you had to sort of describe originally a very specific organization, then you would have to. Now, what I do sometimes see is organizations that say, we don't quite have all of our subrecipients in hand yet. We don't know who will be our partners on this. However, here is the basic criteria for whom we'd like to involve in this project. Now, if that is the case, and maybe you originally intended one, but now you're going with another, you would not necessarily have to ask or request permission to sort of change your own mind about that. But if you did specifically name the organization and it was in the NOFO, or if the terms and conditions require any changes to subrecipients, then you would have to ask for permission. Here's an example of sample language if you were in that scenario. You might say, on behalf of ABC Nonprofit and per 2 CFR section 200.308F6, we would like to request prior approval for a revision to our subaward activities for the grant, building federal grant management capacity for New Mexico, insert the federal award identification number, from the U.S. Agency of Awesome, Office of Cool Grant Programs, with a program performance period of October 1st, 2024 to September 30th, 2027, effective immediately upon your approval. Instead of issuing a subaward to Organization A in the amount of $25,000, we would like to issue a subaward to Organization B for the same amount. And then you want to give a description about why you feel that they can do the same work that the original organization was. So I might say something like, Organization B has 17 years of experience in providing one-on-one coaching and training assistance in building nonprofit capacity, including writing and managing federal grants. All of Organization B's staff have earned their Grant Professional Certified or GPC credential and or their Certified Grants Management Specialist credential or the CGMS, and are also GPA approved trainers. Additionally, Organization B was also named Nonprofit of the Year by our local Chamber of Commerce in 2022. So you want to build them up much like you would have built up the previous subrecipient in your proposal. Organization B will perform all of the same activities as Organization A was approved to perform. Existing resources already committed from this grant would support this change. And then insert the boilerplate text. So I want to give you a couple of tips when you're thinking about possibly asking for a scope modification, whether it's an objective, subrecipient, or you really are changing one of your major activities. The first thing is you want to make sure to demonstrate how the new scope or objective meets the program goals and priorities. Make sure you're directly citing the NOFO and or the statute when you're doing this. Secondly, demonstrate that the new scope or objective or activities can be finished during the program performance period. You don't want to build a bunch of stuff on and then be like, oh, we don't have enough time. Now we need a no-cost extension. Now, I will say sometimes you are actually submitting a scope modification in tandem with a no-cost extension, meaning requesting more time to do it. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. So that is something you could do, but most of the time, the program officer is going to want to see that your requested scope revisions, unless something very crazy, unexpected happen, is still going to be able to be done within your program performance period and without additional funds. Lastly, you should explain why either you are not able to do what you had originally intended or why you don't want to do it. Sometimes things change and you're like, that's actually not a good idea to include that anymore because these circumstances over here changed or this, program got introduced and that would be duplicative. So if you want to make a change, not only do you need to describe the change that you want to make, show that it actually aligns with the program goals and the statute goals, but you also need to be able to demonstrate that there's a good reason for the change request. Scope modifications are one of only two things that we will discuss today, and frankly, only one of two things at all in the uniform guidance that actually have a time period, a timeline for which program officers must get a response to you, okay? So what you do is you give them the new scope or objectives that are proposed for prior approval. The federal agency will then review that scope and or objective, and then they have 30 days to get back with you to give you an answer about whether or not they're going to approve it, or they can ask for another 30 days before they have to give you an answer. So no matter what, when you put in a scope modification, technically the federal government has to give you an answer within 30 to 60 days, depending on if they notify you sort of halfway in between. Now, there's not a lot of enforcement to this. There's not much you can do about this if they haven't followed those rules. You can sort of gently prod or remind them like, hey, just, we put this in on such and such date. It's been more than 60 days. The uniform guidance does strongly encourage you to give us an answer, say it kind of nicely. You don't ever want to be contentious or acrimonious, but it is good to know your rights. And especially right now, because program officers are so overtaxed, you're going to want to give them some leeway. But if it's especially important or if it's holding up other things, it's not a bad idea for you to advocate for yourself and say, hey, we really need an answer on this. And per the uniform guidance, we're supposed to get it within 60 days. Can you give us a timeline as to when you can get us an answer? I'm not going to read these, but these are the citations for scope modifications. Now let's talk about the other major modification, which is a budget modification. Despite your best laid plans, let's say your grant goes totally sideways and you are just not going to spend nearly as much as you thought you might under travel and contractual cost categories. However, let's say you need much more money in personnel and fringe benefits in order to execute your project to as closely as possible in the approved scope of work. All of the aforementioned cost categories, let's say they're already approved, you're not asking for any new cost categories. And there's no change to the types of activities. You just kind of need to shift around some monies because some things are costing more, taking more time, and some things are not taking as much money or time. If you need to do this, prior written approval for budget modifications is required when there is a request to either modify any budget that requires project prior approvals for every dime. regardless of the amount, as specified in your terms and conditions. I have occasionally seen this in the terms and conditions, though it's not super common. Additionally, you need prior approval if you are going to transfer funds between approved direct cost categories, meaning things you've already got approved in your budget. If the total budget exceeds 250,000, and if the cumulative amount of the transfer exceeds 10% of the total budget. So this is what is often referred to as the 10% rule, okay? So most of the time it is extremely administratively burdensome, not only for the recipient, but also for the program officer, if they were going to have to approve every single dime you move around from existing cost categories. So they give you this sort of 10% leeway or fluctuation that you can make only in the cost categories that you already have approved. Now, if you wanted to move something to a cost category that you do not have approved, let's say you're suddenly putting something into equipment or construction that you didn't previously have, then you do have to get prior approval for that. So some sample language for this type of request might be something along the lines of, on behalf of ABC Nonprofit and per 2 CFR 200.308B, we would like to request prior approval for a budget revision for our grant, Building Federal Grant Management Capacity for New Mexico, insert federal award ID, from the U.S. Agency of Awesome, Office of Cool Grant Programs, Random Federal Program. Per 2 CFR 200.308C, please find attached the SF 424A and revised budget narrative in the same format used in the original application, articulating the proposed new budget for the period of performance beginning October 1st, 2025 and ending September 30th, 2027. And then I might put in parentheses, just to make it easy, years 2 and 3 of this program. Now, my recommendation to you, when you are doing a new budget narrative, it's harder to do with like an Excel spreadsheet budget, but budget narratives, I would recommend you put on track changes, and then you have sort of the red line changes in the budget narrative to make it very easy for the program officer to see what exactly got changed in the narrative. Then you want to make sure to put in a short summary justifying these changes. So you might say something like, the proposed changes are requested because the evaluation activities are not going to require as many resources as previously projected. And there has been a larger demand from participants for one-on-one coaching sessions, which directly strengthens their capacity to manage federal grants, increasing and improving program success. And then insert that sort of standard boilerplate language about the terms and conditions, don't prohibit it, etc. A few tips for you on budget modifications. Just like scope modifications, you want to demonstrate how any newly requested costs relate to the program goals and objectives. Or if you are buying more of a thing, how are you sort of scaling up your program to serve more? You want to demonstrate that the new expenditures are reasonable and allowable for the grant. If you remember the last session that we had back in November, I believe, we talked about how to procure things and how to justify and go through the process of, is it reasonable, is it allocable, is it allowable, etc. And obviously, you want to monitor your burn rates. Do not wait until after the expenditures have already been made. You want to sort of anticipate changes that might need to be made to your budget ahead of time and not after the fact. As previously mentioned, budget modifications are it's one of two things in which the program officer does have to get you a response within 30 to 60 days, depending on if they send you an email in the meantime that just says, we need more time. There is no enforcement to this, but again, it's good to know your rights. And there is no timeline for any of the rest of these things that we're discussing today. There's nothing defined in the uniform guidance. So while they do always do their best to answer you as soon as possible, know that you want to stay ahead of these things and you want to ask for these things much sooner rather than later, because you have no idea what the timeline is to get approval. There are some citations for you all if you want to look back. If you're like, man, I need some really invigorating evening reading, you can read these uniform guidance citations. All right, so let's talk about budget carryovers. And this is sometimes called carrying forward. In this case, I actually am going to read to you the two places in the uniform guidance where it talks about budget carryovers or carrying forward, because it's in some ways the uniform guidance is incredibly helpful and detailed, sometimes overly detailed, and at other times there's this sort of weird thing that happens, and this is one of those cases. So let me read the citations and I'll explain to you what I mean by this. So 2 CFR 200.308 G3 says that the federal agency is authorized to waive other cost-related and administrative prior approval requirements, which may include carrying forward unobligated balances to subsequent budget periods. The other citation is 200.403H, which simply says the federal agency is authorized to waive prior written approvals to carry forward unobligated balances to subsequent budget periods. Okay, that's interesting and important, but why is that weird and why is that noteworthy? Well, nowhere in the uniform guidance does it ever actually say you can ask for carrying forward unobligated balances. There is no permission to do it or description about how it is done. There's simply these two sections that say the federal agency can waive prior approval requirements for this thing. It's sort of this nebulous thing that we don't know how's it supposed to be done, right? So let me explain one other sort of set of key terms and phrases so that this will make some sense to you. Your program period of performance is not always the same as your budget periods. So in this imaginary case study that we've been doing, it's a 3-year budget, or it should be 3-year program period of performance. You could have your budget period be that same as the program performance period, and it could be 3 years. Or you could have it so that you have 3 one-year budget periods during the life of the grant. So when the budget period of performance is not the same as the program period of performance, and if you have monies left over in your previous year, but you want to carry them forward to the next year, you have to apparently ask for prior written approval, even though it's not really described how or what is done in the uniform guidance. So let's say you did not expend all of the committed federal funds in your last budget period, say year 2, but you want to use those funds in a subsequent budget period, say year 3, during the approved period of performance on the same grant. So you have to get prior approval, unless they waive it, if it is not expressly prohibited in the NOFO or the statute governing the grant. Now, I actually do see this quite a bit in grants. For example, you'll see a grant that says the maximum award is $750,000. No more than $250,000 may be spent in any one of the 3 years. So that is them telling you, no, actually, you cannot carry over funds, because if you carried over funds, assuming you had the max grant, you would have, say, $100 left over on last year's. You could not have $250,100 on year whatever. So that is one way that it could be prohibited. But if you are planning to propose using the funds for activities and objectives already approved in the, if objectives already approved in your approved scope of the work, then you shouldn't have to worry about any budget carryovers, if that makes sense to you, unless you're combining it with a scope modification request. Sample language. On behalf of ABC Nonprofit and per 2 CFR sections 200.308B and 200.308G3, we would like to request to carry forward the unobligated balance of $7,837.41 from the budget period of October 1st, 2025 to September 30th, 2026, year 2, to the subsequent budget period of October 1st, 2026 to September 30th, 2027, year 3, for the, quote, building federal grant management capacity for New Mexico, end quote, program. Insert the federal award identification number. From the U.S. Agency of Awesome, Office of Cool Grant Programs, Random Federal Program. These funds were not expended during the budget period of October 1st, 2025 to September 30th, 2026, year 2, because the costs of evaluation activities were not as high as initially projected. Per the attached budget spreadsheet, we would carry forward the unobligated balance of $7,837.41 from year 2 into year 3 of our award, which is October 1st, 2026 to September 30th, 2027. We plan to utilize those funds to increase the number of hours available for one-on-one coaching and technical assistance activities that are already approved in our current scope of budget. So you're basically saying, like, we're not doing anything new. We just want to scale up what we're already doing. And then you're going to include sort of that boilerplate text that I recommend, but is not required that you include in your requests. So I want to pause really quickly here to see if there are any questions. I'm going to double check the Q&A, and I'm going to look really quickly in the chat. Feel free to type something in the chat because we're going to shift gears a little bit in a second, but I don't see anything, so that's okay. And there's definitely going to be time after this to ask questions as well. So the next section is on what are called the selected items of cost, okay? So selected items of cost are like a very broad range of special circumstances in which if you think you want to do a thing or spend money on a certain activity or expenditure, it will either tell you that's prohibited, like you can't use federal funds for alcohol, or that is extremely limited and will only be allowable in certain examples, such as entertainment. It's usually a no-no, but sometimes there are circumstances in which entertainment is allowable. Or it'll say, like, totally allowable, but you still need to get prior approval. Okay. So in 2 CFR 200.308 F4, it does say that there are some selected items of cost that require prior approval. So not only might there be special circumstances under which only you are able to make an expenditure or do a certain thing, but there are some, not all of them, that also require prior approval. So on this slide and the next slide, you're going to see the short list of those things that are considered selected items of cost, but also anything that has very specific must ask for prior approval. And in this chart, you'll see on the left-hand side the exact citation that will tell you exactly where you need to go to find out more about it. And in the guidebook that I mentioned at the beginning of this, it's like that 30 or 40 page guidebook that I put together, it actually has very detailed information on every single one of those things. So you kind of know what exactly do we have to do or get. So for example, at the very bottom, you'll see fines, penalties, damages, and other settlements. So it says costs resulting from violations of or failure to comply with federal, state, local, tribal, or foreign laws may be allowable when incurred as a result of compliance with specific provisions of a federal award, but only with prior approval. Okay. Another example might be under travel costs. You might say travel for certain government officials must have prior approval. That could be the office of the governor, the chief executive of a local government, the chief executive of an Indian tribe, the attorney general, etc. Or if you want to have somebody travel with their dependents and have the dependents also be paid for by the grant, you can only do that if the person traveling for the grant is traveling for 6 months or more and you have prior approval. So I don't want to go through every single one of these. It's pretty tedious, and most of these are probably not going to apply to most of you in this room. But I did want you to be aware that there are some things in which you do have to get prior approval. All right, let's talk about cost sharing, or what is often called matching. Used to be called matching all the time in the federal government and in the uniform guidance, but in the October 1st, 2024 uniform guidance revisions, they changed this term to be cost sharing. Okay, this is when you, as the awardee, have to put some of your own monies or maybe leverage other people's investments, other organizations' investments, I should say, to offset the federal share of the total project costs. So let's say while writing your application or after you receive your federal award, you are trying to establish the sources of funds for cost sharing, and you determine that your organization could afford to opt out of recovering part or all of your indirect costs. A request for prior approval can be submitted by either including this in your original proposal, which gets approved, and then that's what you operate from during the course of your grant. Usually it's stated in the budget narrative, but sometimes it's in both the budget narrative and the technical proposal narrative. And or you can make a formal written request if this is sort of a new thing that you want to do and you didn't think about it during the application process. You have to make a formal written request to your program officer, and you have to include a budget spreadsheet to demonstrate how that distribution of cost share will work. I'm going to actually skip ahead for a second because I know what I described is actually a little bit confusing. So I want to show you a very quick and simple chart in certain terms of how this would work and how this would change. Let's say you have a project and the total project costs are $125,000 and the max federal award is $100,000 and the max or and the match required match is 25% of the federal award, meaning the federal award is 100,000 and then you are required to match 25,000. Let's say you have a very simple budget. You've got 50,000 in personnel or salaries, 10,000 in fringe benefits. You have 40,000 in contractual, right? Which all subtotals up to $100,000 in direct costs. Now, presuming that you are using the de minimis indirect cost rate of 15%, you would be eligible for 15,000 in indirect costs. But if you added that onto your direct costs, your total project budget would actually be 115,000, which would exceed the max amount of the federal award. Now, before we advance to the next slide to kind of show you how these monies would be shifted around, let's talk about your match. Let's say so far the only thing you have identified that you're able to match are stipends, which are $10,000. Now, there are no indirect costs on stipends. That's one of the things that is excluded from indirect costs. So there is $0 on the match column because there's no indirect cost eligibility for those $10,000 worth of stipends. So now, if you want to make this change that I'm advising you, you can. You have the option to. You can take the $15,000 under the indirect cost line item from the federal side of things. You would zero that out, which would then make your total federal request $100,000. And then you would switch the 15,000 over to your side because what you're essentially doing is you're saying to the federal government, we are opting not to recover the indirect costs that we would be otherwise eligible for. So because we're not recovering money that you would be sending us, this will act as our match. So then if we put that 15,000 for indirect costs on the match side, that plus the 10,000 in stipends would equal the 25,000. And so you would then be in a situation in which if you get prior approval, either through the original application or afterwards, you could actually apply unrecovered indirect costs as your match or cost share. I hope that makes sense. I was super excited the first time I discovered that this was a thing because always trying to find cost sharing is one of the most difficult things with federal grants. And so if you can afford not to recover your indirect costs, that is not a bad option. Now I want to back up for a second and go to the sample language for how you would request this after the fact. Let's say you didn't put it in your original proposal and you are going afterwards to the program officer and asking for this. You might say something like, per 2 CFR, section 200.306C, ABC nonprofit would like to request prior approval from the U.S. Agency of Awesome Office of Cool Grant Programs to utilize $15,000 in unrecovered indirect costs from the federal share as our cost share for this proposal to serve as a cash match. The amount of $15,000 is calculated based on the de minimis indirect cost rate of 15% on the modified total direct costs of the project. All right, so we're going to forward through these things because we've already gone over them. Now, here's another example for cost sharing. It has to do with the valuation of something that you might be trying to donate. Let's say that your organization is seeking to donate a building for long-term use as part of its cost share. Now, per your organization's accounting records, the value of the remaining life of the property is recorded as $100,000. However, the real estate market is really good right now for sellers, and let's say the fair market value is actually $125,000. Well, per the uniform guidance, the program officer is to take the lesser of either the recorded value or the fair market value. However, you can, with prior written approval, ask for the higher amount. And so you might say something like, per 2 CFR 200.306D, and in accordance with the cost principles of Subpart E and 2 CFR 200, ABC Nonprofit would like to request prior approval from the U.S. Agency of Awesome, Office of Cool Grant Programs, for a variance on the formula to establish the value of our one-story building of 8,500 square feet located in a commercial zone located at 1234 Main Street in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This property will be donated for long-term use as part of our cost share for a project, building federal grant management capacity for New Mexico. Insert the award identification number. The value of the remaining life of the property recorded in our accounting records is $100,000 as of March 1st, 2025. However, the current market value is $125,000 as of March 1st, 2025. This request is being made because our accounting records reflect the depreciated value of this commercial building, but it does not reflect the strong market and demand for commercial real estate with these amenities in downtown Albuquerque. We believe, based on the condition of the building and market comparisons, the value of $125,000 is a fair and reasonable value to request for this donation. And here are the citations for that. I see, yep, Tonia is putting in there. If you're joining us, please use the Q&A for any questions that you've got. All right, so now we're going to talk about program income. Before we talk about how to request changes to program income or how to get prior approval to do certain things with your program income, I do want to take a minute to explain program income and the three methods of applying program income to your grants. So first thing first, what is program income? What does that even mean? Well, it could be income from fees or for services that you perform, the use or rental of real or personal property, the sale of commodities or items fabricated under the federal award, license fees, royalties, patents and copyrights, and principal and interest on loans that are made with federal awards. So if you have any kind of program income that is specifically derived from a program that is being supported by a federal grant or award, then it's considered program income. Now, if you have some revenue that you generate with another program or another service that has nothing to do with the grant award, that's not considered program income. That's just other earned revenue, okay? Program income also does not include any rebates, credits, discount, or interest earned like in your bank account for when you have, say, a disbursement, okay? The only interest that you have to pay on are loans that are made with federal award funds. So program income has three different methods of application. The first is deduction. That means that the program income that you earn is deducted from the total allowable costs, which basically reduces how much the federal government is going to pay you. So if they gave you a $300,000 award and you get $5,000 in program income, the deduction method would say, okay, instead of giving you $300,000, we are now only going to give you $295,000. Addition, that method means that the program income is added to the total allowable costs. So in that situation, you would then have $305,000 federal award. That's the way they consider it. You had $305,000 federal award dollars to then work with for your program. Or you can use program income to meet your cost sharing, similar to also not recovering your full indirect costs. Now, it's important to note that unless otherwise stated, the standard method for applying program income is always going to be the deduction method, meaning if you had $300,000, you earned $5,000, you now only get $295,000 in federal awards. So unless you get prior approval to use either the addition method or the cost share method, or both, if you have enough program income, right? You have to get prior approval no matter what. So let's say, for example, your organization is anticipating a modest program income once you get things up and running from the grant award that you have. The method of applying the program income was not actually defined in your terms and conditions. It doesn't say kind of one way or another what is going to be applied. So you have to assume that the default method is deduction. You want to request that the addition method be used, so program income would be added on top of the federal award, so that basically you can scale up your program and serve even more people. If you want to do this, you must get prior written approval by saying something along the lines of, on behalf of ABC Nonprofit and per 2 CFR 200.307B, we would like to request that program income derived from our grant, Building Federal Grant Management Capacity for New Mexico, insert award ID number, would be applied using the addition method instead of the deduction method. We request this change from the U.S. Agency of Awesome, Office of Cool Grant Programs Random Federal Program, so that we can scale the program to serve more people through the same activities already approved. We propose to apply program income to the personnel and fringe benefit cost categories to be used for increasing the personnel time and the effort committed to performing one-on-one coaching in grant acquisitions and grants management. And then insert the boilerplate terms. Okay. Now, no cost extensions. This is the one thing that I told you all from the beginning is where you do have to include that boilerplate text, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's pretend like you're in a situation where you're unable to execute one of your planned trainings, right? Something happened, the roof caved in, the facility had to cancel, and so now you have to reschedule it, and it's past where the performance period would be ending. So if you want to be able to include it in your final summative evaluation report and your terms and conditions do not allow you to just initiate your own extension, which I'll talk about in a moment, then you have to get prior approval for a no-cost extension, and it should be solicited at least 10 calendar days before the conclusion of the approved period of performance. So you have to do written supporting justification, you have to give them the revised period of performance, and you have to assure them of the boilerplate text that you'll see in a moment. So you have to say something like, on behalf of ABC Nonprofit and per 2 CFR 200.308F10, we would like to request a one-time, no-cost extension of the period of performance to complete work on our grant, Building Federal Grant Management Capacity for New Mexico, federal award ID number inserted here. The current end date for the period of performance is September 30th, 2027. The desired extension period is 9 months for a new end date for the period of performance being June 30th, 2028. Now, I want to note to you that in almost any instance, I would recommend to any of my clients, and most of the time the program officers are going to recommend to you, if you are requesting a no-cost extension, just request the full 12 months, right? 12 months is the max that you can request at a time. Just make sure to put the full 12 months, right? But here, we're at least saying we need at least 9 months. And you might have even, we expect we need at least 9 months, but we're requesting the full 12 months just to be sure that we can get this through. Then you want to explain. The scope of our work is to provide quarterly 3-day training sessions around the state of New Mexico to build federal grants management capacity for 501c3 nonprofit organizations, municipalities, federally recognized Indian tribes, schools, and institutions of higher education. Participants will also receive ongoing one-on-one coaching and technical assistance. While we anticipate completing most of the activities related to the 3-day training sessions and one-on-one coaching and technical assistance offerings within our existing period of performance, this one-time no-cost extension is requested to allow for a small but meaningful amount of additional work, namely, first bullet point, ABC Nonprofit was approved to add our objective to the program on September 17th, 2027 to leverage a return on investment of at least $8 to $1 offered as matching funds. This objective has been incorporated into the schedule for our final excuse me, final summative evaluation activities, but we would like to give more time for data collection to ensure the analysis of the full pilot program with matching funds. Next bullet point. The launch of our third cohort of training participants was unexpectedly delayed due to circumstances beyond our control when the training site experienced structural damage. The earliest we can reschedule this final training is 1 month after the end date, the current end date for a period of performance. In order to assess the effectiveness and success of a matching funds pool combined with our capacity building efforts, and to incorporate those results in our evaluation report, we request at least an additional 9 months to complete the work in supporting data collection, such as finding out whether or not grants were awarded, and if so, how much, and sort of doing that analysis. Finally, this is what has to be included in your no-cost extensions. You do have to affirm that the terms and conditions of the federal award do not prohibit an extension request, that this extension request does not require additional federal funds, nor does it involve any change in the approved objectives or scope of the project. And lastly, no changes to the terms and conditions of the initial award are requested. Now, remember I mentioned earlier that you have to ask for prior written approval if it is not in your terms and conditions that you can initiate your own. Now, this is really not very common, and I have most certainly not seen this very much except for during the time of COVID when it sort of haphazardly got included in almost every grant, right? But occasionally you will find a grant in which it just says, we waive your need for prior approval on a one-time, no-cost extension up to 12 months. And you can just initiate it on your own. Well, when that happens, you still have to notify the federal agency with written supporting justification. Really, it shouldn't say written supporting justification. You just basically have to advise them that you're doing it, right? And you should do that before 10 days before the conclusion of the period of performance. And you can only initiate your own one-time no-cost extension of up to 12 months if you are not just doing it for the sole purpose of spending money you haven't spent yet, that the extension does not require any additional funds, and if the extension involves any approved scope or any change in the approved scope, then you would have to go and also get prior approval for a no-cost extension. So in this case, you would use slightly different language, saying something like, per the terms and conditions of our federal award, because it would be included in there, and per 2 CFR 200.308G2, ABC Nonprofit is writing to notify you that we are initiating a one-time no-cost extension of 9 months or 12 months for our grant, Building Federal Grant Management Capacity for New Mexico, from the U.S. Agency of Awesome Office of Cool Grant Programs Random Federal Program. The current end date for the period of performance is September 30th, 2027. The new end date for the period of performance is either June 30th, 2028 or September 30th, 2028. And then, of course, including that same boilerplate language. So here are the citations for you if you want to sort of see how and why this all works, right? But I do want to draw your attention to one part of the uniform guidance that we haven't quite addressed in any of these things. Maybe it doesn't fit under sort of one of these scenarios, or it doesn't fit under a hard and fast rule about when you must ask for prior approval or when you must contact your program officer. But there is a section, 2 CFR 200.329E. It's called Significant Developments. And basically it says that you must notify the federal agency if there are significant developments in your grant, which could include less cost than anticipated or more. It could include problems, delays, or any adverse conditions that are impacting your ability to implement it effectively, or when there are any significant developments that might need you to have some kind of corrective action plan, or if you need assistance, like we don't know what to do now because this major thing just happened, and so we still want to do it, but we need some guidance as to how we can do it, right? If anything significant arises, you do also have to contact your program officer. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to do prior approval for anything, but you are obligated to say, hey, just so you know, we bought this tractor that we expected to be, I don't know, $75,000, and it was only $25,000. We got it on a great sale or something, right? If there's something major, you are supposed to contact your program officer. All right, now we're on a quick bonus round of just a couple of other details before I'm going to open it up to questions and answers. So, it is possible that the following three things could be waived in which you do not need to get prior approvals. The first is you might have a waiver which says you don't have to get prior approvals for pre-award costs. This would necessarily be either in your terms and conditions and or in the statute governing the grant. As we just talked about, you could also have a waiver in your terms and conditions or the statute that waives your requirement for prior approval for one-time extensions and allows you to initiate your own one-time extension if you want. And also, as we talked about in the carryover or carry forward section, they can waive your requirement for asking for prior approval to carry forward funds. But it would all three of these things would necessarily be explicitly stated either in your terms and conditions and or in the statute governing the grant. If they're not there, then assume the prior approval still applies. What is nice, though, is if you have a research award, those three things, pre-award costs, one-time extensions, and unobligated balances, are automatically waived for all research grants, which is kind of nice. Additionally, there's a very nice section, which I have only had to invoke very gently once with a program officer, that says, unless specified in this guidance, meaning the uniform guidance, the federal agency must not impose additional prior approval requirements without OMB approval. So I had a situation in which a certain department, I will not name names, was demanding that we had to get prior approval for every single change to our budget that was a penny or more. They did not care. If there was anything changing, they were demanding that we had to have prior approval. Now, this was not stated in our terms and conditions. It was not stated in the statute. It was not even stated in any of the agency guidance that still would not technically trump the uniform guidance, but it would at least have let us know what to expect and anticipate, right? And as I mentioned, you don't ever want to be contentious with your program officer, but sometimes you do need to gently push back. And so I said to the program officer, I've read the statute, I've read our terms and conditions, both of them multiple times. There is nothing in there that requires us to have to get prior approval for every single budget change. And we aren't doing it more than the 10%. Remember that rule, the 10% rule. So we should be able to make these changes. And so they kept insisting that they had the right to just impose these things. And then I said to them, to CFR 200.308E says you can't impose additional requirements without OMB approval. So can you show me the OMB approval? And they could not. And so they backed down from this. And that was good because the amount of work that was going to go into trying to manage this would have significantly jacked up our expenses and personnel because we'd have to go and ask every time we wanted to change. And that was just not, it was going to blow the budget out of proportion. And so I had to gently push back. I don't know that there's a science to this. It's kind of an art, right? But you just kind of like, can you show me where? Because what I'm reading in the uniform guidance says you can't do that, right? Now, this is my most exciting share for you. In 2 CFR 200.308F8, it says that a recipient or subrecipient, an awardee basically, must request prior written approval for the following budget-related reasons. If the need arises for additional federal funds to complete the project. And I said, hold on a second. Does that mean we can actually go back and ask for more money? And the answer is yes. And I guess in my mind, when I first started in grants, I just didn't understand that. You kind of, you get told like, you get this amount of award, you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. Now, if there is a max award that is dictated by the statute, you can't exceed that, okay? But let's say the max award was 750,000 and you only applied for 650,000. You have up to $100,000 more that you can go back to your program officer and say, hey, we're doing great work. There's a huge need for this. We'd love to scale it up. We would need to spend some more time. Do you have any extra funds in your department that you can obligate or allot to us for this purpose? And this is actually remarkably much more common than people realize, because either people have not spent the full amount of their awards, which is very common. Awards may have been terminated. Awards may have been canceled. We know with this administration, there are a lot of things that have happened. And so many of these departments are sitting with these extra dollars. Now, I know that this administration is trying to get it so that as many dollars are saved as possible. However, these departments are still stuck with these funds that they have to expend or return to Congress. And most of the time, those departments don't want to do that. And so if they have extra funds around and you can justify how and why you would use those funds in a way that would meet the program statutes, but not exceed your max amount, or if there is a max amount, you can actually ask for more funds. And I do have clients that have done this. It's not super common, but it has been done in the past, and additional funds were awarded, or an additional new grant, which allowed them to obligate funds without even going through the application process. In some rare circumstances, can also happen. So I just wanted to sort of end this on a very positive note, because I feel like most of this time has been set saying, you have to ask for permission, you have to ask for permission, you have to ask for permission. But understand that I'm not doing that to be negative by any means. I just want to make sure to sort of protect you all, safeguard you all from making any missteps, and also let you know that there are some ways that you can sort of advocate and protect yourselves as organizations or agencies. Now, as I previously mentioned, there is a guidebook. This is the cover page of the guidebook that you all are getting. It has the citations, it has the sample language, and it has even more information about all of these things that we discussed, plus the selected items of cost, plus more. So you will be getting that as one of the handouts, along with my slides and a brief list of trainings and some other free resources available from the grant plan. But right now, I would like to actually stop sharing and invite Danielle to come back on the screen with me, and we'll go through any questions or topics that maybe you all want some more guidance on, or you have, questions of clarification on.
Did not get any in the Q&A or the chat, but again, for those attendees on, it's your opportunity to get some direct questions answered.
How many of you feel overwhelmed? I know that I feel a little overwhelmed sometimes when I teach this, because there's just so many things to remember. So I want you to know that I don't expect you to remember all of this, right? I want you to remember enough where you go, I think there was a thing that I need to ask about or look up, and then you have this guide. Hannah says, does the guide you will be providing include the information about the 10% budget rule? Yes, it does. Yep. Not only does it have the information that sort of summarizes it, but it also gives you the exact citations so that if you need to discuss it with your program officer, you can cite that. But if you are in a situation in which you're like, I don't want to say fighting with, but like going back and forth with your program officer, just make sure that you read the statute governing your grant, as well as your terms and conditions very thoroughly to make sure that it wasn't already in there, that there might be some other reason. I actually had an NSF grant recently that said the amount was 15%. They gave us a 15% threshold before we had to come to them. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting and rare. So, but 10% is the minimum. And that is only for grants that I'm gonna have to look this up because this very recently changed. So in the federal acquisition regulations, which sometimes is a companion to the uniform guidance, the simplified acquisition threshold just increased on October 1st, 2025 from 250,000 to 350,000. And so it might be now that it only applies the 10% rule can be waived if it's $350,000 grant or more, if that makes sense. So Any other questions, topics? We'll give you all a minute or two to, I know sometimes it takes a second to type in.
Just like the last session, Tanya, you're just so thorough. No,
Yes,
it's a lot.
I would like to say that's what it is. It's that I'm just extremely thorough and I've everybody knows everything they need to know.
It is a lot of great information. I just want to, and this will be in the email as well. I just want to point out one more time that the guidebook that attendees will be getting, it is proprietary information of the grant plan. Please do not share it. It is for your use only in partnership that we have with Tanya and the team. So I'm looking forward to getting this information out as soon as we can get this recording wrapped up and edited. So all your follow-up information will be sent out, but please do not share the guidebook. It is for your use only as an attendee today. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share the slides again. As Danielle wraps up, if there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll watch for that. And then, of course, you see my contact information there. So
Yeah, so again, thank you so much, Tanya. It was a lot of great information and a lot of things that I don't administer grants anymore as someone who formerly ran nonprofits, but a lot of great information that I didn't know. So thank you for that. Your information again is here on the screen, your email as well as mine if anyone does need to contact myself or Tanya. And then we encourage you to check out the resources on AmericanIndigenousTourism.org. As you know, our staff and partners work collaboratively to support Indigenous tourism across the United States. And if you haven't yet, click over to DestinationNativeAmerica.com to start building out your cultural itinerary and travel across our nation today. You can navigate through experiences, places to stay, restaurants, and more. That's that third little bullet point or third little thumbnail there. It's a great interactive resource to utilize if you're traveling in and around the US or if you're interested to see what cultural experiences are in your neck of the woods. And lastly, also on our website is additional training opportunities, including our partnership-based certificate programs. And you can visit our website for more information regarding those programs, upcoming webinars, past webinars, resources, and other events. Please also consider signing up for our weekly newsletter, the Rupert Report, to keep up with all things Indigenous tourism. For more information, again, our website, AmericanIndigenousTourism.org. And again, thank you so much to Tanya and the team at the Grant Plant. We appreciate your time today, and we look forward to seeing you again on another webinar.
thank you all for having us. We love being here.